Don't open that envelope yet. I didn't know it then, but the moment my son's wife handed me that birthday card with both hands and that soft smile, she had already been stealing from my brother for 11 months. My name isn't important. What's important is that I'm 63 years old. I've worked 31 years as a high school history teacher in Columbus, Ohio, and I thought I knew people. I thought I could read a room. My late wife, Patricia, used to say I had a gift for it. She'd say, "You always know when something's off." Patricia passed 4 years ago from a stroke, and after she left, I'll be honest, I stopped trusting my own instincts. Grief does that. It fobs everything up. My brother Aldous is 71, 8 years older than me. Our whole lives, he was the one who held everything together. When our father left and our mother worked double shifts at the laundry on Broad Street, it was Aldous who made sure I had lunch money. Aldous who helped me with my college application. Aldous who drove 14 hours straight when Patricia died just to sit with me in the kitchen and not say a word. That kind of brother. He retired at 68 after 40 years in commercial real estate. He wasn't rich, but he was comfortable. He had the house on Lakeview Drive in Westerville that he and his wife Norma had paid off together. He had his pension, his Social Security, and about $140,000 in a joint savings account that Norma had left him when she passed 2 years before Patricia. The two of us, both widowers, both rattling around in houses too big for one person. We talked on the phone every Sunday evening without fail. His son Calvin married a woman named Serena about 3 years before all of this happened. Calvin was 41, a quiet man, worked in logistics, kept to himself. Serena was 37. She came from Akron. She had this way of entering a room that made you feel like she'd already assessed everything in it. Sharp eyes. Quick with a compliment. The kind of woman who always remembers what you ordered at a restaurant 6 months ago and brings it up to show she was listening. I noticed that. I thought it was warm. I was wrong. It wasn't warmth. It was inventory. I liked her in the beginning. I want to be fair about that. When Aldous had his hip replaced in the winter 2 years ago, Serena was the one who organized his meals for 2 weeks. She drove him to physical therapy 3 times a week. She kept a little notebook with his medications and appointment times. Aldous talked about her like she was a gift. He told me, "Calvin finally found a good one." I agreed. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Serena had a gambling problem. Not the kind that shows up the way you expect, with debt collectors calling and credit cards maxed out. Hers was quieter than that. Online. Sports betting mostly. And she had been losing steadily for almost 2 years. Calvin didn't know. Serena had a separate account Calvin knew nothing about. She was meticulous about keeping it hidden. That's the part that still gets me. The organization, the notebooks, the medication schedules, all of that careful attention to detail. She used the same skill set to hide the hemorrhage in her finances that she used to make my brother feel cared for. I don't know exactly when she started. The investigators later told us the first unauthorized transfer from Aldous' savings account happened in March. Just $300. Tested the water. Aldous never noticed. He checked his balance about once a month, sometimes less. He trusted Calvin completely, and Calvin had been added to the account years ago as a secondary holder, so he could help if anything happened. Serena knew that. She'd had access to Calvin's banking app for over a year because Calvin had asked her to pay a bill once, and she just kept the login saved on her phone. 300 became 700, 700 became 1,200. By September, she was moving between $2,000 and $3,000 at a time, twice a month, to an account in her name alone. In 11 months, she had taken $62,000 from my brother. Here's what makes me sick about it. During that entire time, she was still bringing him soup when he had a cold, still texting him on his birthday, still sitting at his kitchen table on Sunday afternoons while Calvin watched football, flipping through old photo albums with Aldous and asking questions about our father, about our mother, about Norma. She was building trust with one hand and emptying his savings with the other. I found out on a Tuesday in February, not from Aldous, not from Calvin, from a woman named Brenda. Brenda worked at the branch of Aldous' bank on Cleveland Avenue. She had been his personal banker for 11 years. She knew him by name, knew Norma had sent a sympathy card when Norma passed. She wasn't supposed to call me. I understand that. Privacy regulations are clear. But she had seen something that Tuesday morning that she couldn't shake, and she had found my number because Aldous listed me as an emergency contact on his account years ago, and Brenda made a judgment call that I will be grateful for until the day I die. She called me at 2:15 in the afternoon. I was grading papers at my kitchen table. "I need to speak with you about your brother," she said. Her voice was careful, professional. But there was something underneath it, a tightness. "I can't go into specifics over the phone, but I think you should come in. Today, if you can." I drove to the bank in 20 minutes. She sat me down in her glass-walled office near the back. She pulled up the account history and turned her monitor toward me without saying anything at first. I looked at the screen. I looked at the numbers, the dates, the amounts, the name on the destination account. "How long?" I asked. "The pattern we can see goes back to March of last year." I sat with that for a moment. I said, "Does my brother know?" "No," Brenda said. "I haven't contacted him yet. I wanted to speak with family first." She paused. "I've seen this before, not as long, but I've seen it." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. A printed summary. "Before you do anything, I'd strongly recommend you speak with someone at the Columbus Police Financial Crimes Unit. They handle this regularly. They'll know how to proceed in a way that protects your brother and doesn't tip off the person responsible." My hands were steady. I don't know why. I think I was still in the part of shock that feels like calm. I thanked Brenda. I walked to my car. I sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes, I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard, and then I drove to my brother's house. Aldous was in the kitchen making chili. He was in a good mood. He'd just gotten a call from an old colleague. He was humming something I didn't recognize. I sat down at his table, and I watched him stir that pot, and I thought about how to begin. And I couldn't find a way to begin that didn't feel like I was about to detonate something in the middle of his kitchen. I said, "Aldous, when did you last look at your savings account?" He turned around. He knew my tone. He said, "Why?" "Just tell me. When did you last check it?" He dried his hands on a dish towel. He sat down across from me. "Last month sometime. End of January, maybe." "Why are you asking me like that?" I told him. I didn't soften it. I've thought about whether I should have led up to it more gently, and I don't think I should have. Aldous is not a man who needs to be protected from facts. He needs to be respected with them. He was quiet for a long time. He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He just sat there with his hands flat on the table, and he stared at the middle distance, and he said, $62,000. Not a question. He just needed to hear himself say it. Then he said, "Calvin doesn't know." "I don't believe so," I said. Another silence. The chili was starting to simmer too hard. Neither of us moved to turn it down. "She was with me on Thursday," he said. "She brought me cornbread." I didn't say anything. "She asked me about Norma's jewelry," he said, "whether I'd done anything with it yet." He stopped. He put both hands over his face for a moment and then put them back on the table. "I told her it was in the bedroom, in Norma's old jewelry box." I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. We called Calvin that evening. That was the hardest part. Calvin had no idea. Watching a man find out that the person sleeping beside him had done this, I don't have the words for it. He went very still. Then he went to the bathroom and I heard water running for a long time. When he came back out, his face was composed, but his eyes were somewhere else entirely. He said, "What do we do now?" I had already called the Columbus Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit before I came over. I had spoken with a detective named Gaines, a methodical man with a quiet voice, who told me exactly what Brenda had told me. Don't confront, don't alert, don't give any indication that anything has changed. Let them work. "Does she have any reason to think anyone's looking?" Detective Gaines had asked me. "None," I said. "Good. Keep it that way." For 2 weeks we kept it that way. Calvin went home that night and slept in the same bed. He sat across from her at breakfast. He answered her questions about what he wanted for dinner. I don't know how he did it. I have never in my life respected my nephew more than I did during those 2 weeks. The detective's office worked with the bank to document the transaction history. They obtained a warrant. They built a case that didn't depend on anyone's testimony, just the records, the IP addresses, the timestamps on every transfer. Every time Serena had logged into that account from her phone, it left a trail she never thought to cover because she never thought anyone was looking. On a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of February, 2 detectives came to their house while Calvin was at work. Calvin had told them he would be at work. It was part of the plan, and they arrested Serena at the front door. She had a bag packed. She had a flight booked to Phoenix for the following Saturday. Calvin said later he didn't know about Phoenix. He said he didn't know about any of it. The charge was felony theft. Ohio law is specific. Theft over $1,000 from a person 65 or older carries an enhanced penalty. Oldest was 71. The prosecutor later told us they were pursuing it as a first-degree felony. Up to 11 years. Serena's attorney entered a guilty plea 4 months later. She was sentenced to 4 years in a state facility and ordered to make full restitution. The $62,000, all of it, to be repaid. Aldous has gotten back $41,000 so far. The rest comes from a payment schedule. He doesn't talk about the money much. What he talks about, when he talks about it at all, is the Thursday afternoons, the photo albums. The way she used to ask about Norma, like she genuinely wanted to know. That's the thing that costs him the most, I think. Not the money, the performance, the idea that someone can sit with your grief and use it. Calvin filed for divorce. He moved to a smaller apartment in Dublin. He comes to Aldous' house for dinner on Sunday evenings now, and sometimes I drive over from my side of Columbus, and the 3 of us sit around that kitchen table and eat and talk about things that have nothing to do with any of this. We talk about the Buckeyes. We talk about what's on television. We talk about a road trip the 3 of us have been loosely planning for years. Up through Michigan, over to Mackinac Island, something Aldous and our father always meant to do together, but never did. We haven't taken the trip yet, but we're going to. That part I'm sure of. There are things I want to say that I'm not sure how to say, so I'll just say them plainly. If you have an elderly parent, an older sibling, anyone you love who is alone and who trusts the people around them, check in, not to be intrusive, not to take over, just to be present. Ask to see a bank statement once in a while. Not because you're suspicious of anyone specific, because people who do what Serena did rely on the fact that families don't ask. They rely on your trust, your good manners, your reluctance to be the person who makes things awkward. Serena counted on all of us being too polite to look. And one more thing. When someone you barely know starts making themselves indispensable to a person you love, pay attention to the shape of it. Warmth that shows up too organized, too consistent, too perfectly calibrated. That's not always what it looks like. Sometimes it's a ledger. Sometimes all that attention is just a long, patient way of keeping you from looking at the books. Aldous is doing all right. Some days better than others. He still makes his chili on Tuesdays. He still calls me on Sunday evenings. Last week he told me he'd gone back to the bank and sat down with Brenda and thanked her in person. He brought her a tin of cookies. She cried. He told me that part, and then he was quiet for a second, and then he said, "You know what she told me? She said she almost didn't call. She said she went back and forth about it for 2 days." I was quiet for a moment too. Then I said, "I'm glad she did." Aldous said, "Me too." That's the thing about this whole story that keeps me up at night. Not the betrayal, though that's bad enough. It's the near miss. It's the 2 days Brenda spent going back and forth. It's all the small decisions along the way, any one of which could have gone differently, and we never would have known until the account was empty. And Serena was somewhere we couldn't find her. But they didn't go differently. Brenda called. Calvin held it together. Detective Gaines was patient and thorough. And Aldous, my older brother, the man who made sure I had lunch money when we were kids, got to keep his house. Some stories end the way they should. This one did. I keep coming back to something Aldous said the night I told him. He didn't ask how she did it. He didn't ask about the money first. The first thing he said was, "She asked me about Norma's jewelry." That's what broke through, not the number on the screen, the jewelry box, the Sunday afternoons with the photo albums, the way she'd sit with him and listen to stories about a woman she never met, and all the while she was calculating. I've thought a lot about what makes a person capable of that, and I don't think it's a mystery, honestly. It's a choice made over and over again in small increments, the same way Brenda watched those transfers get larger month by month. Serena didn't wake up one morning and decide to steal $62,000 from a grieving old man. She decided $300, then $700. Each decision made the next one easier because she'd already crossed the line and the world hadn't ended. That's how character erodes, not in one dramatic moment but in the quiet choices nobody's watching. Or so she thought. What stopped her wasn't luck. It was Brenda's conscience. Brenda spent 2 days going back and forth about whether to make that call, and I think about those 2 days more than I think about Serena's sentencing. Because Brenda didn't have to do anything. She could have told herself it wasn't her place, that the privacy regulations were clear, that someone else would notice eventually. Instead, she sat with what she knew, and she decided that doing nothing was its own kind of decision. That's not a small thing. That's a person who understood that being decent sometimes costs you something, your comfort, your certainty that you're staying in your lane. And then there's Calvin. My nephew held that secret for 2 weeks. He went home and made dinner and answered ordinary questions and went to sleep next to someone he now knew had been systematically dismantling his father's savings for nearly a year. I asked him once how he managed it. He said, "I just kept thinking about what Dad needed, not what I needed." That's a kind of discipline I don't take lightly. It would have been so easy to confront her, to blow the whole thing open, to let his own pain run the situation. He didn't. He stayed steady long enough for the people who knew what they were doing to finish their work. Those two things together, Brenda's moral clarity and Calvin's self-control, are what got Aldous his outcome. The system worked because the people inside it chose to make it work. That matters. Here's what I want anyone listening to take from this: the people who prey on the elderly, on the widowed, on the lonely. They count on your family being too distracted, too polite, too trusting to look carefully. They count on the Brendas of the world deciding it's not their business. They count on the Calvins losing their composure. When those things don't happen, when people act with integrity even when it's hard and inconvenient, the outcome changes. Aldous got to keep his house. He still makes his chili. He still calls me on Sunday. Pay attention to the people around your family who try a little too hard to make themselves indispensable. Not because everyone who shows up with kindness has a hidden motive, most don't, but because the ones who do are counting on you not looking closely enough to tell the difference. Look closely.